My name is Heran, Sereke-Brhan. I am from Ethiopia. I have been in the US now more than half my life, so I'm probably bicultural in that sense. I was born and raised in Ethiopia until I finished high school, which was 16 for me. And then I came to the US to go to college mainly, and then graduate school. My parents were in different ways very appreciative of the arts, and had close friends who were contemporary artists at that time in the 70s in Ethiopia. And so I grew up with a lot of theater people, music people, actors, performers around me. My parents made sure we attended every theater opening and every musical performance that I could go to as a young child. So that was a big part of my formative years. I went to a private school. I was able to benefit from a really good education. It was a British school so I learned English at an early age. And then there was, family. There was the setting. Addis Ababa is a very cosmopolitan city. And so the exposure that comes with that as well. So a very rich and varied kind of childhood growing up. Coming to the US, a lot of my life was spent in academia. So undergraduate, the first place I came to from Addis was California. So San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley. And geographically, it resembles Ethiopia. It's very mountainous. The air is similar, dry, temperate kind of weather. So that was a nice transition. One of the first things I experienced was an earthquake in Hayward, California. And I was sleeping in a waterbed, and it happened in the middle of the night, and my brother was not there. So I had no idea what was going on. But that was, sort of a norm after that. In California, it happens quite often. And life in California was also good. I can't really claim to have any, huge transition moments coming to the US. But later on, when my family joined, my father and my mother joined in, my father needed some health treatments, and that's probably the time that I saw what it might mean for an immigrant person coming to the US and trying to get medical treatment. There was a lot of struggle around that for our family. So that's probably the first sort of recognition I had that, it might be a different thing as an immigrant in the US. So my journey began from California to, first from Ethiopia, from Addis Ababa to Oakland, California. I went to undergrad to an all-women's school, which was also very new to me, in Oakland, California, Mills College. And from there, I worked for 1 year and then made my way to graduate school to Michigan, where you would think it's the last place you would go to study African history, but there I was, and I studied with a scholar who had worked on Ethiopia for over 40 years. We built another community there, graduate students, African students, Caribbean students, African American students, and lived there in that transition graduate school space for close to a decade. And there, from there, I came to Washington, D.C. to work at the National Museum of African Art at the Smithsonian. And D.C. became home in many ways. There's a huge Ethiopian community here. The largest one outside of the country lives in the district and DMV area. So it became, and then somewhere in between, I moved back to Ethiopia. I worked for about 4.5 years there. Reconnected with the academic community, with the arts community, and did some of the big things that I'd hoped to do, I had dreamt to do, I was able to do. And then I returned to DC because DC was home. In many ways, it had all the elements that I looked for in terms of where I wanted to live and who I wanted to surround myself with. So DC is home on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, at least. I am of the belief that you can find your community wherever you are. And for me, one of the big things that happened when I joined my undergraduate school was becoming a part of the Black Students Association on campus. African students, but also African American students. And you know, that was something I identified with very early, and it gave me a community, it gave me a home, it gave me a lot of arts people that were there in Oakland at the time, musicians and dancers and so on. It gave me a community to connect to, and it was a world I was already a part of in Ethiopia, I felt, at least had some affinity towards. So that happened fairly quickly. There's a large Ethiopian community in Oakland as well, and after undergrad I worked at the Ethiopian Community Center. So that was another experience, sort of working with refugees and immigrants that were coming into the area, and seeing what their challenges were and working closely with them. But I think community is really, you know, where you are. You can build it, you can connect to people, you can there's always universal things that connect human beings in general, and so one has to build from wherever life takes you. That's where you build your community from in many ways. In my life here in the U.S., I have been a part of major exhibitions at the Smithsonian, at the African Art Museum, an Ethiopian exhibition there, a large Ethiopian exhibition in Florida, and other African-related events, conferences, happenings, public speaking opportunities, publications. So in many ways, I try to keep that connection alive, because that's what really provides meaning for me in my life. And then when I ended up in government work, I was very excited to be a part of the Office on African Affairs, because again, there it's an office that deals with African immigrants in the district. So that's how it all connects to me. A lot of the things I value are centered around honoring the lives of folks that have had a deep effect on my life. And that group of people, the one group of those people are contemporary artists in Ethiopia, literary figures, the poet laureate Sereke-Brhan, the poet-artist ገብረ ክርስቶስ Desta, musicians that I've grown up listening to, traditional musicians. I play a traditional instrument as well. I studied it from a young age. And so in many ways, what I realized was, as a young person growing up in Ethiopia, they really formed my sensibilities. And then the generation that's there now doesn't know who they are. In one lifetime, in my lifetime, I can see that there's a gap. So a lot of what I did when I went back to Ethiopia, and what I continue to do in ways that I can from far away, is republish their books, be involved in editing their works, restage their performances back on stage. And one of the most exciting responses I had was from a young 15-year-old gentleman who knew nothing about some of the writers and the poets that we were working with, and I invited him to a performance, and he came out of there just completely blown away. The language, even the Amharic, was difficult for him to understand. But it was such a revelation. And he said, the next time it happens, I have to go back to this, and please keep me informed. And so, like, to see the excitement of the younger generation about the people that I loved growing up was the big reward. And then on this end, I worked on a few art exhibitions and some publications as well. I think for me, the arts is a way of understanding the human condition. It's not just an exercise in aesthetics. It is. I studied history for graduate school, but I studied art history as well. And to me, the arts is a way of really finding the universal values and connecting people in a way that really feeds them, feeds their spirit, feeds their soul and their intellect in ways that is inclusive. And so that's where I go back to again and again. But I also studied history, and history is something that, for me, that continuity, that sense of a past and a sense of projection forward is very important as a compass, as a guiding kind of compass to where one wants to go, as a trajectory. And for me, it's always been the space where I can see the connections between Africans in the diaspora in the larger sense. Jazz music, literature, the writers of the Harlem Renaissance. And Ethiopia was very much a part of people's consciousness in many ways, of a certain generation of Caribbeans and African Americans. The Italian invasion of Ethiopia, Ethiopia's victory over the Italians was a symbol of pride for Africans everywhere on the continent and in the diaspora. So to me, that combination of history and the arts provides a very inclusive kind of platform for people to meet in. Is it enough? Probably not, because there are, programs and services, real kind of social service type needs that you can definitely see in the community. But it's the way to keep people's spirits buoyant and people's spirit connected to something that's rich and, and would feed them in many ways. But I think one of the things that happens is there's a very sort of, Hollywood-influenced impression of life in the U.S. And I've tried with family members at home to have conversations about prepare yourself. Even if you're going to leave, have some education, have some kind of skill, have something under your belt so that you're not caught up in a grinding kind of life where it doesn't go anywhere, anywhere that you go. So it's important to get skills, and that might be in a formal way in a school, in an educational setting, or vocational, or explore what it is of your own that you can do as an entrepreneur, as a business person. But I think the best way to prepare and to get the most out of the experience once you've moved here is to find a community, but also, train yourself, prepare yourself with something that you're able to use to, generate a life for yourself that way. The work we do now at the Office on African Affairs is very much an attempt to help with the integration of immigrants. It is a way to allow people to transition well and find communities that they can tap into. That might be faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, others that have gone through similar experiences, but connecting people to resources so that their transitions actually are smoother. And if you move, and you move at an older age, and you move with family members and older and younger family members, it's a different experience every time. And so we try to really pay attention and be responsive to what our African constituents need in the district, and how do we connect them? How do we get them closer to social and education and health and employment opportunities that they can benefit from? And we try to do it in a way that's dignified, that people don't feel as though you come from someplace else and now you have to act like a child, or everything you've known before doesn't matter. We try to do it in a way that we are cognizant of the lives that they've led, and we're able to support them in the transition to becoming a part of the American fabric. Among the greatest needs are language access. DC is in my opinion, very progressive in the way that it's dealt with immigrant needs. and language is a big part of it. The Language Access Act was passed over 10 years ago, and it allows district residents who speak languages other than English or don't have enough proficiency in English to approach government agencies and ask for services in different languages. That's one big need that's there and that the district government has tried to address. There are needs in health, there are needs in education, there are needs in culturally being able to help young people make that bicultural transition, but also there are older people that don't have that navigation ability. And so young folks feel sometimes caught between these two worlds where, you go home and there's a certain, expectation, and then you step out and you have to appear or, in the interest of blending in and not calling attention to yourself, which at a certain age is important, then there's that pressure as well. So we try to really keep an ear to the ground as to what the community members need. Anyone can walk into the office and request services, and we try to be very responsive to that. But then there are also more organized programs that our office runs, and we find that a lot of Africans participate in a way that this is a part of us. There's that ownership and that sense of community there as well. I think for me, the excitement always is learning, and learning about the variety and the diversity of Black folks everywhere, and finding the threads that connect those. I am always just thrilled to listen to music, jazz music, find the connection to African music, find connections between different types of music. I'm always excited to read young contemporary writers who are writers of color, Latino, African American, African, and find that spark that people have kept going since writers of the earlier generations. I think there's a commitment always to progressive ideas when it comes to people of color and artists of color that I've followed over the years. And so that has always inspired me. It's been very uplifting that way. It's always for me, somewhere between history and the arts is where the intellectual excitement and the daily excitement comes into my life. And then to be able to bring that to people through different services. Public service is exciting. That's exciting because it's an access to communities and a meaningful life in terms of providing resources to people. So somewhere in that is where, the daily excitement comes in for me. Yeah. I think it's a really exciting time for Africans here and Africans on the continent. I think it's a time when all the right connections are building and the perception of Africa is changing, and Africans are really becoming the center of the narrative, finally. Being able to tell our own stories, being able to connect with each other and find those linkages. I think it is really, truly a time of change. And it's exciting to be a part of that in ways that are personal but also professional, and to be a part of a dynamic that might change the conversation. So that is an honor. It's being, born at the right time at the right place, but also being, having lived that life for a long time and then seeing those same values reflected by a larger community of people everywhere, here and on the continent. So we're a part of something grander, all of us, and that's exciting.